We now turn to discussions of this evening's papers. We are very fortunate to have two anthropologically well-informed archaeologists who focus on the religions of past and present-day Native North Americans to discuss the papers and put them in broader perspectives. First is Professor Kelley Hays-Gilpin of Northern Arizona University and the Museum of Northern Arizona. She is a Southwestern archaeologist who currently works in close collaboration with the Hopi tribe on their iconography in mural paintings, rock art, pottery, basketry, and textiles. One of her areas of study, pertinent to this symposium, is the iconography of the flower world afterlife of Uto-Aztecan groups in the Southwest and Mesoamerica. She also co-edited the book Belief in the Past, Theorizing an Archaeology of Religions. Kelley, it's a pleasure.
Good evening. I'd like to begin my discussion with two salient quotations. Archaeologists see surface rubble and artifacts, but as Pueblo people, we hear the spiritual ancestors who reside in the places non-Indians call archaeological sites. We are instructed to speak to the ancestors at our old villages, to sing, to listen to the elders, to learn. The spirits are waiting. They're waiting for you to come, we say. These words come from Paul Tosa from Jemez Pueblo and Octavia Ciotoa from the Pueblo of Zuni in a book called The Continuous Path, Pueblo Movement and the Archaeology of Becoming, which I highly recommend. It was published in 2019, last year. The second quote is, "To Native people, the spirits are very real," said Pete Kofi, the director of the Tribal Historic Preservation Office for the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara Nation. "These are all elders. They have been disturbed, and they need to be put back into the earth as soon as possible." These words were written by Carolyn Catherman and Christina Zdano in 2020 in a newspaper article entitled 2000 Native American Remains, which sat in a university for 50 years, will soon go home. Authors in this session urge archaeologists working in North America to take indigenous ontologies or worldviews seriously and literally. In recent decades, archaeologists aim to facilitate inclusion, diversity, and respect so that many voices are heard in the process of not only research, but also heritage management, legal compliance, museum education, and all the activities that bring us together to get things done. This session moves woodland archaeology in the right direction. Scientists and indigenous people have some common interests. The importance of religion, spirituality, and the interconnectedness of all living things, past, present, and future, is an important foundation to Native life today, must have been so in the past as well, and therefore must be included in archaeological thinking. Archaeologists are doing a better job of studying religion than we did in decades past, and this symposium is exemplary. As a former tribal archaeologist who works in the Southwest, I was surprised to hear from Chris Carr that serious studies of religious rituals, ideas, and iconography are not common in Eastern Woodlands archaeology, especially pre-Mississippian archaeology, like they are here in the Southwest. Evidently, my formative years at the University of Michigan, Beloit College, and subsequent encounters with Bob Hall, Bob Salzer, and others were unusual and fortuitous. They certainly pointed me in the right direction, though. But I packed my bags and I've plied my trade in Arizona since 1983, with occasional check-ins with Bob Hall, among others. For several years around 2010, Bob Hall and I took part in an unusual series of seminars at the Santa Fe Institute called the Cosmology Working Group. This group applied a broad range of methods and some personal agendas such as archaeoastronomy to the question of how interdisciplinary investigation can shed light on archaeological expressions of cosmology and worldview. This series of discussions produced very few publications or other tangible results, but affirmed interest throughout the Americas in indigenous views of how humans and other than human beings, including celestial beings, are organized and interact. So I'm very happy to see some of Bob's vision and the interests of others coming to fruition here. I read the symposium papers earlier this year. Then, as part of my quarantine world, I've been sorting out old files. I came across notes from a University of Arizona seminar on North American ethnology taught by Gerald Levy, a medical anthropologist who works with Navajo and Pueblo communities. He assigned Joseph Jorgensen's Western Indians, a resource that I still turn to frequently. What I had forgotten till now was that Jerry set our class to a systematic comparative ethnology project focused on creation stories of Western tribes. We identified mythemes, engaged in classification and tabulation and so forth, rather like the task undertaken by some of the authors in this session, but back then we students had less success in identifying meaningful patterns. Still, we learned useful methods and appreciated the diversity of ethnographic worlds and challenges of using ethnographic accounts from different historic contexts and researcher biases. I think Jerry Levy, Bob Hall, Franz Boas, Elsie Parsons, and other founding fathers and mothers must be looking down with an approving smile at the efforts here to systematize and compare Native American religious concepts. The exercises I described were promising, outlining some necessary outlooks and useful methods, but produced few results. By working rather closely with Hopi and other Pueblo collaborators, my colleagues and I here in the Southwest have produced some useful archaeological publications that draw heavily on indigenous worldviews. The papers in this session have produced detailed and useful results without the benefit of intensive interviews with indigenous practitioners or collaborators, or at least not very many. That's impressive. The session has pointed out some overarching themes in the worldviews of woodland peoples and patterns of contrasts without getting caught up in overly detailed particularism. As many of the papers in this session demonstrate, even within one community at one point in time, not everybody saw the world the same way. Differences in the way a single community buried their dead, for example, is evidence that not everybody believed that death was the same for all, but neither did every community have an entirely unique approach. The comparative method has served anthropology well for over a century, and we generally do it well. As scientists, however, we often do get bogged down in our categories. The ontological turn encourages us to focus more on relationships, so that's a good thing about the new animism. Categorical essentialism has been a real problem for scientists as well as for indigenous people. Good science involves challenging the categories we construct, ensuring that categories fit goals and contexts, and making new ones for questions that are new and for new contexts. Categories that seem logical to scientists don't always seem so to indigenous people. What is living, animate, agential, and intentional? Hallowell's Anishinaabe case illustrates important differences, and Rex Week's paper highlights and applies Hallowell's insights from ethnographic fieldwork so that we can approach relevant categories from an emic, or at least a less etic, standpoint. For example, Rex and other authors in this session point out that indigenous North Americans in the woodland area, as in the rest of the Americas, are saying that there really are souls, or what can be glossed as souls in English, an emic category. Most scientists are still saying, well, there aren't really souls because souls don't have material reality, our etic category. The ethnography cited in this session shows that some soul-like entities or essences described in woodland ethnography sometimes do have material reality, and that this is a very complicated domain of experience that bears respectful investigation. The contexts of the studies in this session are very different from my work contexts, and that's what attracted me to the discussant role. First, this is not applied archaeology, at least not yet. The studies here are not about land and water rights or co-management. They aren't yet about cultural affiliation, repatriation, and reburial, though I'd like to suggest that they could be used in that way. They can also be used to broaden the comparisons to continental scales. The connections between living communities and the archaeological burials discussed here are less clear than they are in the Southwest. The eastern U.S. has seen a great deal more depopulation of indigenous communities, displacement, removal, and forced assimilation. Many living communities identify strongly with Mississippian sites, artworks, and artifacts, Osage, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Miccosukee, and others. The Hopewell sites discussed here are much older. Nonetheless, comparative ethnology shows strong and widespread patterns, and these suggest great time depth. You do have descendant communities who can be part of the discussion. A few that were mentioned here include Cherokee, Anishinaabe, and Huron. Some of these ideas and patterns are shared with indigenous people throughout North America, such as a concern with ordering the world, four directions, center places, a vertical world axis, importance of birds and animals as mentors, ancestors as mentors, and the continuing presence and relevance of ancestors. The idea that there are persistent soul-like essences is also expressed in the Southwest. but with significant variations, such as the transformation of the breath of individual ancestors into a collective manifestation as clouds and rain. The emphasis on moisture and the hydrological cycle is logical given our desert environment, and may well be more connected with Mesoamerica than with other North American traditions. The transformation of ancestors into clouds and rain is accomplished by inhumation among the Pueblos and cremation in the human world. Navajo funerary traditions are quite different and involve the potential for the dead to harm the living in ways that more closely resemble some northern traditions. I can't say more, because my professional colleagues who represent the interests of their contemporary Native communities in the Southwest, such as tribal historic preservation offices, have made it clear that it's time for archaeologists to stop writing about burials and funerary traditions, so that tribal members can speak as appropriate for the various tasks in which this is necessary, such as in cultural resource management discovery contexts and repatriation. It's not that they prefer we as non-natives not discuss religion. To the contrary, they want us to take religion seriously and understand that religion is our category, not theirs, but religion is a term that can be used as a gloss to highlight some things that are important in Native lives. What outsiders call religion is not a separate domain of Indian life, but an integral part of everyday activity, perception, and discourse. In the Southwest, death and the dead are sensitive topics, however, and outsiders should respectfully avoid talking about death and the dead. Not so in Mexico, obviously, so again, this is something that varies from place to place. But I can generalize a bit and say that, as in your comparative studies in the Southwest, belief and practices about the dead and souls vary between and within communities and cultures. Some diversity is reflected in the archaeological record, but also some broad patterns that connect past to present practices. I think your conclusions and the directions you're taking in this body of research have strong research implications and real-world applications for heritage management and repatriation. The presenters explain research implications well and make the jump from ethnographic to archaeological contexts with care and caution. Inferring the process of cross-community alliance building as something that involves ancestors and ongoing relationships among them and between the living and the dead is an especially strong contribution. Your approach makes us look at archaeological contexts in a way that demands depth of thought and deep respect for ancient ancestors and contemporary descendants. Thank you for inviting me to take part.